Hello, everybody. Welcome back to our journey through Mark. Thank you so much for joining us. And while you're here, wherever you are tuned in from, whether you're watching on Facebook or watching on YouTube or listening on Anchor, please consider subscribing, consider following, browse around, see what else is available in the channel that you're tuned in from. There is something for everyone. So thank you again for joining us, and we will be looking at Mark chapter 8, verse 1 to 10 today, which we will start by reading. Mark chapter 8, verse 1 to 10, and this is what it says. During those days, another crowd gathered. Since they had nothing to eat, Jesus called his disciples to him and said, I have compassion for these people. They have already been with me 3 days and have nothing to eat. If I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way because some of them have come a long distance. His disciples answered, But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? How many loaves do you have? Jesus asked. 7, they replied. He told the crowd to sit down on the ground. When he had taken the 7 loaves and given thanks, he broke them and gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. And they did so. They had a few small fish as well. He gave thanks for them also and told the disciples to distribute them. The people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. About 4,000 were present. After he had sent them away, he got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. That's the word of the Lord, and praise be to God. And for those of you who might be watching this in video format, no, I am not sponsored by the Chiefs, but they happen to be my favorite team, although they were not playing today being a Sunday. But I want to thank my lovely wife and my kids who gave me a lovely birthday gift of these Chiefs jerseys, not jersey, but jacket, which is the reason why I have to floss and show off my team colors. With that being said, let's look at Mark chapter 8, verse 1 to 10, the feeding of the 4,000. This is a less known feeding, but it's still massive in terms of crowd reach. It's one of the bigger miracles in terms of everyone who is affected. And it is the last recorded event of Jesus and the disciples' expedition into Gentile territory, where they were last time as we were finishing chapter 7. They were in the Decapolis, the 10 cities region. Here we find a different audience, but a familiar setting with the same provider. The gospel is for the whole world, not just Israel. And we see a contrast here from when Jesus was saying, it is not right to take food for the children and give it to the dogs. But here we find common grace for Gentiles as well. The disciples, being Jews, needed to understand this before being given the Great Commission, before being told to go and speak and give the good news to all the world. They needed to understand that the gospel is for the whole world. So we start with verse 1, where they have been on a healing and ministering excursion, which has taken all of 3 days. And 3 is a very, very significant number in the Bible, as most of us know. But we're not dwelling on the 3 days of what they have been doing. They come to verse 2, which is the only place that Jesus says, I feel compassion in first person singular. It's been insinuated in other places via observers, but here he declares it. And he declares compassion towards those despised by the chosen people. Divine compassion is an attribute of God. You can survive more than 3 days without food, but God cares about your suffering and your worries. As we continue in verse 3, we know that they have come a long way. That's why he says, if I send them home hungry, they will collapse on the way, because some of them have come a long distance. He cares that the world gets saved. He also cares about minor details of your life, like my team making it to the playoffs, my team winning today. He cares about those minor details of your life, those things that you care about even though they're trivial. As we go on verse 4, we find out that it's a remote place. That's what the disciples say. But where in this remote place can anyone get enough bread to feed them? Have they forgotten about the earlier feeding? Probably not. And we'll see as we continue in the book of Mark, Jesus reminding them and knowing that they still have it top of mind. They remember how many basketfuls they picked. But these are Gentiles. Will Jesus provide for outsiders? What would Jesus do? Because he's the only hope. And Jesus turns it around to them, verses 5 to 7. And he starts quizzing them. What do you have? Answer, 7 loaves and a few fish. They're not as skeptical as before. But here, Jesus again creates. He creates fully cooked bread and fish. He makes things from nothing and keeps going until everyone has had enough. That's what we find in verse 8, where he says, the people ate and were satisfied. Afterward, the disciples picked up 7 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Perfect precision. Everyone eats to their fill. And they have just the right amount of leftovers. 7 large basketfuls. The word for basket here implied a very large basket, like a chest or a clothes hamper. It's the same word used for the basket that was used to lower Paul down a wall in Damascus in the book of Acts. So 7 of these would contain a lot more than from the previous feeding. Remember that when we go to the next lesson, as Jesus reminds them of the 2 miracles. And that is evidence of 2 different feedings. And it's also evidence of the integrity of Scripture. It has been implied by critics and skeptics that maybe this was the same feeding that was just told in a different way. No. It was a different feeding, different crowd, just the same provider. Verse 9 tells us that about 4,000 were present. 4,000 men, 4,000 males, 4,000 heads of households. Matthew adds a small tidbit, not including women and children. So this is another massive, massive miracle. If we were to estimate, we would say the total amount of people that were fed is between 15 to 20,000 people. That is the range that is estimated when you add the children and the women. And these are people who haven't eaten for 3 days. And Jesus provides enough for all of them to eat and be satisfied. And then he sends them away. In verse 10, moving on, what does he do? He got into the boat with his disciples and went to the region of Dalmanutha. From the southeast shore to Dalmanutha on the northeast shore. That's where Jesus moved from and to. Matthew calls it Magdala. This was the same region, and it's the culmination of Jesus' trip to Gentile territory as he wraps up his Galilean ministry as well. We are on the home stretch towards the cross. So as we get on that home stretch, let's bring our message home for today. Salvation is for the Gentiles too. He is a creator and displays power over disease, power over nature, power over hunger, and more. He has divine compassion for everyone that has need. Now, it's one thing to feed a hungry mob. It's another thing to be the bread of life for a dying world. And that's what matters. That's who Jesus is. Have you tasted of the bread of life? Have you come to Jesus for his cleansing power? Are you washed by the blood of the Lamb? That is the big question. So as God continues providing for your daily needs, as God continues answering those major and minor prayers, as God provides healing when you need healing for yourself or for a loved one, as God provides financial breakthrough when you need financial breakthrough, as God provides a win for your team when you just need them to win this one game, remember, there's something bigger. There's something deeper. Your life is at stake. Have you given your life to Jesus Christ? When you answered that truthfully, that determines your eternal destiny. And Jesus wants all of us to experience eternity with him. I hope you make the right decision. I hope we all make the right decision. Thank you so much. God bless you. Join us next time as we continue on our journey through Mark.